Hi everyone. In this video, we're going to be talking about understanding the supply chain. What is the supply chain? Let's answer that question first, right? So, all stages involved directly or indirectly in fulfilling a customer request. That's a simple way of defining a supply chain, and this includes all the manufacturers, suppliers, warehouses, retailers, customers, and everybody involved. It also includes all the functions that go with it, like human resources, marketing, operations, finance, customer service, right? So supply chain includes everything that goes into making a product or delivering a service, right from its conception all the way to the end. Now, a customer is also an integral part of a supply chain. Um, it's important to realize that many times when companies define supply chains, they also define what happens to a product after a customer finishes using it. So, let's say that you buy a phone, and you had the phone for over a decade, and you are done with the phone. You can go to, say, a Best Buy, or go back to the company that you bought it from, or even Staples, and they take in old electronics that they recycle. So even that is part of a supply chain, right? So this will include all the movement that happens between all the different pieces, everything from, let's say, you're making something out of metal, everything from how the metal was mined all the way to what happens at the end of the product life cycle, right? So it's a big process. Uh, it's a big deal, and a lot of times a supply network or a supply web is a more accurate term, because many of these companies are interlinked. Sometimes one company might be doing the whole thing with different parts of the chain linked to each other, right? But typically, when we think of simple products that we come across every day, the stages sort of boil down to: you have customers, you can think of them as ourselves, you have retailers, you have wholesalers or distributors, you have manufacturers, and then you have raw material suppliers, right? So this is the general stages in a supply chain. And of course, in all supply chains, they may not be part of all supply chains, obviously, right? So here's a simple example of a supply chain here. So timber company gets the wood. You have a paper manufacturer who makes the paper, and they send it to PG and other manufacturers. The chemical manufacturer makes the chemical using which the plastic makes producer makes the plastic, and then once the plastic comes in and the paper comes in, they're all packaged together. And Walmart, a third party, the once the manufacturing is done, it is sent to a distribution center. From the distribution center, it's sent to the customer, and finally it is sent to the retailer. From the retailer, the customer gets it. So this is a supply chain for something like a notebook, right? So you have paper and you have plastic that need to come together, and then a notebook is made and sold to the customer, right? So this is the complete supply chain for a notebook with, say, plastic spiral binding, right? Okay. So that's a simple example of supply chain. So these are how flows can happen within supply chain. Flows can happen directly from supplier to customers, supplier to retailers, or from manufacturer to customers sometimes. Say, for example, if you're buying a Tesla, right? In most states in this country, you cannot go to a dealership to buy a Tesla. You can go to places where you can test drive a Tesla, but they're not actual dealers. So if you want to buy a Tesla, you'll have to go there, and then you have to go online. They even help you there. You go there online, and they help you buy the Tesla, and the Tesla arrives at your house on a truck. So the manufacturer is selling directly to customer, and there are lots of regulations of why car manufacturers don't sell directly to customers. So there's a lot of discussion there, but that's an example of how that kind of flow can happen. So you can have flows, any type of flows. That's why you can think of this more like a supply network or a supply web rather than a simple chain, right? So, what is the objective of a supply chain, or if you are able to manage a whole supply chain for a product, what is your objective? The objective is to maximize the overall value generated, which is how much does the customer value something minus the cost of the supply chain. When you say cost of the supply chain, it includes every single stage. So, if you go back to the previous example, all the costs involved in making this making this new notebook. They all go into it, and then finally the customer gets it. The customer has a certain value for it. So the difference between the customer's value and the total cost, let's say it costs $2 to buy this notebook, the difference is the surplus, and you want to maximize the supply chain surplus. That's usually the objective of a supply chain. And here are some simple examples. If you buy a wireless router for $60, there are lots of costs that are incurred, not just the parts cost, but also the assembly costs and also transportation costs. There are lots of costs involved, and the difference between the $60 and all of those costs is the supply chain profit, right? And success should be measured by total supply chain profitability and not just at individual stages as it is usually done. Right. So customers is the only source of revenue usually in supply chains. That's not always true. Sometimes you can have companies that buy recycled products or some of your discarded products, but in general, customer is the only source of revenue. And effective supply chain management is the management of all the assets so that you can maximize that supply chain surplus, right? And that is what a supply chain is. Now, I'm going to stop this video here. My idea is to provide short videos, many of them focusing on individual topics to do with supply chain. I will see you in the next one.